Sporadic small-scale protests, arson attacks on enlistment offices, and an open letter signed by dozens of municipal officials calling for Putin's resignation. Now, these are just some of the ways that ordinary Russians are resisting Moscow's war on Ukraine. But over 9 months in, most would agree that there have been little signs of mass protest, neither amongst the general population nor within the upper echelons of the Russian elite. So for more, I'm joined by Dmitry Petrov, who's former deputy chair of an independent local council in Moscow and also the anchor of the Civium podcast about Russian civil society. Dmitry Petrov, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So could you start perhaps by telling us about the Civium podcast?
Okay. Well, it's a podcast about grassroots initiatives in Russia. So people doing things that they enjoy and changing the society, transforming it. It ranges from someone just preserving architectural details in Samara, for example, or there's a guy in Kamchatka who actually set up a surfing school, which is unprecedented. You can surf with volcanoes behind you. It's an interesting experience.
Are most of the people that you've profiled focused on kind of like local initiatives like that, or is there a political element to some of their grassroots activities?
Some, sure. I mean, most of the civic activity comes to politics one way or the other. So all the ecological initiatives that we've covered, certainly they, I would say, are fairly close to politics. We also had a few episodes where we actually interviewed politicians, local politicians, independent politicians like myself, who also putting their chip into changing the society.
What do you think are you gave some examples in the first response, but what do you think are some of the stories that best illustrate the relationship that kind of ordinary Russians today have to their elected officials?
I don't think that we have examples like that in our podcast, because we try to inspire people to join civic activity. That was our main goal. That is our main goal. We're preparing an English version of the podcast, and there we have a different objective. We want to share the stories of, we want to show English-speaking audience that civil society in Russia does exist, because when you look at the media, it's all Putin and maybe a bit of Navalny and all the atrocities that Russians are doing in Ukraine. But behind that, once the regime falls, if it does, when it does, it's the civil society that's going to pick up from there. And it's important to keep the connections. That's why I personally don't think that cutting Russia off is a very productive, in that sense, measure.
Earlier this year, you penned a piece in the Moscow Times expressing optimism about the municipal elections in Moscow earlier this year. I want to know first if you still feel optimistic about the results, and also if you think that there's something specific to Russia's political culture that makes local politics particularly efficient in your view.
I don't think it's about efficiency as such. The most important thing is people getting involved. And my optimism wasn't about the results of the elections as such. And I mean, this year, I believe it's only 16 deputies, independent representatives that was elected compared to 250-ish 5 years ago. So it's not about the results, but rather about the process. People getting involved. Personally, in my own constituency, there was a whole group of locals. So I personally didn't live in Yakimanka where I was elected, but we've managed to get a local council of councillors who were actively participating in and then actually run their own campaign. Of course, they were taken off the ballot, most of them, and couldn't participate, couldn't be on the ballot to be voted for. But it means that there were people actually going around from door to door and who are prepared to speak the truth, who are prepared to say that war is a war and not a special operation like Putin and his regime are putting a lot of pressure for people to use the euphemism.
I think you maybe partially answered it there, but how do you think the war in Ukraine thus far has transformed civil society in Russia? Is it making them get more involved or not necessarily?
I'm not a political analyst. I find it hard to respond to how exactly the society reacted. Certainly, the level of repressions has shot up considerably. A lot of activists have left, but at the same time, I think there's one important idea that I'd like to point out here. Putting pressure on people and civil society in Russia and just people generally to join anti-war protests is not working very well in terms of helping the society to expand. Just an example: we had a guest on our episode who was really great in doing what she was doing. She was getting people involved in preserving architectural details in St. Petersburg. Really got a huge movement of hundreds of thousands of people who were following her on Instagram and joining in to preserve those details. But once the war started, she had a really huge value crisis, and as it happens, our episode with her was due to be released soon, and she even asked if we could postpone and not release it at all. And then in a week or two, I saw that instead of doing her what she was doing before, which was really, really effective in getting people involved, she started painting over Zs and Vs and posting pictures of that, which is really high risk for her, yet I don't feel like it's as effective in terms of getting people to open their eyes to the fact that there was a war going on. So she was risking a lot and not, in my opinion, achieving much. Luckily, I think she's turned back to the activity that she was doing before. But that's just another illustration that it's not everyone can be Navalny.
So what do you think is effective then?
In terms of stopping the war, well, I think I don't think that there is much Russians. Well, they're the only ones who can do something, and as I said, I'm not a political analyst. I don't think I can pinpoint what it is that can be done. Unfortunately, if I understand correctly, you didn't move to France because of the war. But I want to know how you reconcile wanting to be involved in civil society and wanting to bring light not only to what's happening with the war, but also to Russian initiatives to getting involved in politics with the fact of being abroad. Well, I don't think that there's where you live is sort of your personal choice, and what you choose to do is another matter. I personally was educated in the UK, and before that, I grew up in Moscow and was there up until I was 14. Moved away for 10 years, and then came back in 2007 with a sense that I want to play a role in how Russia is going to develop. But it wasn't a role that I wasn't aspiring to be another Navalny. I just wanted to be one of the good people who will help things to go slightly the right way. And in that sense, at some point in last year, I just realized that, maybe a little earlier than that, I realized that my input is not very effective, yet I'm giving up on a lot of the freedoms and a lot of the peace of mind, actually, for the relatives primarily, because I was civically active, and it's okay. I can bear the risks, but as soon as it translates to my family, it's a question of whether you are, I mean, it's a hard decision whether you want to be active, and then whether you're prepared that your relatives, your immediate family is going to be under risk because of that.
In your time as the deputy chair of an independent local council in Moscow, did you feel that the voices of citizens were being heard?
Well, I think my idea was when I was standing up for election to show a different face of politics. Actually, just the other week I was in IKEA, and it happens that I was wearing the same shirt, and I was recognized as a few times. People mistook me for an employee. And I think I wanted to give people this feeling that they have someone in politics who is like that person in IKEA, who's willing to help, who's willing to say how things really are. And in that sense, I feel that I've achieved my goal. I certainly got a response from my constituents that they could turn to me, and I wouldn't be just telling them random stuff, but I would try and hear them and respond. And I feel that that's really the main thing that local politics in Russia kind of achieves. It shows people that there is a connection that they can make with each other, essentially, and those horizontal links are the ones that are going to help the society in the future to rebuild all the institutions that were brought down by the regime.
It's certainly something that hopefully applies even beyond the borders of Russia. Dmitry Petrov, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.